A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics, where we're going to take a bit of a look at something that came out in 2022. Late 2022, that is. In fact, maybe this would be a good time to make a quick reference to the likes of a successful, gory trilogy known as Dead Space. In fact, this particular title is deemed as a spiritual successor of the trio, as the Callisto protocol does in fact give us a similar vibe, if not the same exact sort of vibe on there. Because even though this is very much not related to anything from the plot line or storyboard of the Dead Space trilogy, the Callisto protocol at least gives us a similar feel and even look to the whole thing, while at the same time modernizing things to give us players the same generalized experience. And while this is in fact true, it does play and overall feel much like the Dead Space series. Let's keep in mind, just a month after the release of the Callisto Protocol, they rebooted the Dead Space series and gave us a brand new game for the PS5. So, the thing is that while this doesn't really share any sort of correlation or any kind of relation in general with the franchise, I mean, Dead Space and Callisto Protocol are different things. Not just in terms of who originally developed or published the game, as Striking Distance Studios was the one who developed the likes of the Callisto Protocol, but it's also for the fact that while it didn't exactly meet a lot of expectations in comparison to Dead Space, but the thing is that the Callisto Protocol at least still does give us a pretty likable story. And our main character is literally Josh Duhamel. Yeah, it's been a while since we last heard from him. I almost wondered, why is he not doing much in terms of acting anymore? He's had such a great foreboding facade to him, and his overall voice profile was rather distinct at the time. I mean, he kinda seems like a son of Brad Garrett in a way. Regardless of all the crazy, wild theories that might have sprung up because of this game's existence, it's fair to say that the Callisto Protocol at least was a good piece when it came to being set in the future and having some ultra-violent shootout action to it. And while at the same time it does give us a unique story of a cargo ship worker being taken into a prison, falsely identified as a convicted felon, and is forced to break out and showcase the truth. Well, the game itself first takes place on a certain ship in the 24th century, just off the atmosphere of a certain planet. Well, Jacob Lee, the name of a worker aboard a certain cargo vessel, does in fact work on board, and happens to find that the cargo inside is apparently of high interest to somebody. Callisto, which actually refers to a moon and not so much of the planet Jupiter, does in fact happen to be the high spot for a certain prison. Yeah. If it hasn't become clear by now, it's kind of what Fate is about. Black Iron Prison, which is, in fact, maximum security, happens to become the next spot for where, when Lee's ship crash lands on the Callisto, he is at first discovered by the likes of a few nearby personnel. One of these persons is in fact the man in charge, the warden if you will. However, unlike Warden Quincy Sharp of the Batman Arkham games, this warden is in fact quite different in a way. The thing is, he's certainly one whom is hiding a certain ulterior motive. And when Lee is captured, he's certainly brought in with unique flair. Kind of reminds me of the aura in terms of prisoner processing that took place in the Guardians of the Galaxy films. But I guess in this case, it seemed a little more tortuous, because the Callisto Protocol basically has Jacob Lee's back neck being slammed I mean, they implant a device into him. It's supposed to monitor his health and, believe it or not, actually acts as a health bar. Who would have thought? A health bar strapped to the back of your neck? And technically, it's made to stay there. Probably forever, even. And the thing is that when Lee is put into a cell, it's pretty much over for him. He can't exactly prove all that much of what happened and why he's there on Callisto in the first place. But however, hell would break loose. You see, Black Iron Prison would actually become a victim. The victim of a certain outbreak that took place. And Lee's cell is eventually opened by a fellow inmate. This inmate, of course, does follow him around and eventually allows for him to escape. And while this guy, known as Elias Porter, does in fact give us some good advice and even accompanies us on the trip, he unfortunately later succumbs to some injuries. And while Jacob is not exactly a fan of all of this, especially with the warden, Duncan Cole, mind you that, it's become clear by this point that this was more than just a simple invasion. All these monsters that Jacob and Elias have been hunting, and all of this stuff that's been going on, including the security robots. Yeah. If it's not obvious by this point, it's as if Duncan Cole was hiding something. Because looking deeper into all of this, especially when you're out and about, away from the prison, well, he was not only a man of power, but a man with quite the double life. He wasn't just a warden in this case. No, he actually did way more than what one would have expected. It's also around this point, at the same time that Porter dies, in which another character is eventually brought along. Yeah, this other character, she basically was following him in a way. Her name is Dani Nakamura, and she's played by Karen Fukuhara. But I will say that between her and Josh Duhamel, I wouldn't quite consider them to be the best duo that could have been available for the Callisto Protocol, because both of their unique auras and character energies that they deliver on the set, regardless of what projects they might have, with Duhamel, for example, being well known for such franchises like Transformers, and Fukuhara having her own works implanted, it seems that with both of these actors, they happen to display very different things from each other. I wouldn't really say that they're made specifically for this game. But whatever the case may be, they at least do work in their own way. And their own roles that they play in the game here. Both of which as main characters, mind you that. As Fukuhara's, Dani was not exactly made to be a minor character. No. Much like how Elias Porter did manage to last a good amount of time. Probably more so than what should have been done. I mean, this was a man that broke Lee out of his cell at Black Iron Prison to begin with. And even provided him some of the equipment necessary. I mean, you got a melee weapon, you got guns, and you eventually get a hold of some special armor. This armor also does allow for him to walk outside of the buildings and breathe in the not so great atmospheres of Callisto itself. It's rather icy as well. So, no matter what one would have expected, the likes of both Jacob and Dani do try to carry on, hunt their way through various buildings, many which were overrun by the creatures in hand. These creatures, of course, should be recognized as ones that are certainly not like the necromorphs from the likes of Dead Space. No, but the thing is that what we have here are some different creatures. These creatures actually do evolve, by the way. That's what one should be considered here. And while they might start off as weak and not so strong in their own way, a bit minuscule compared to others, we do eventually get to encounter more types of enemies along the way. And there's even bios that we get to read up about some of them and even find out what their weaknesses are. some of which will fire projectiles, some of which will have weaknesses that can only be found in one specific spot of their bodies, some of which can be taken down easily, others might need more time, and also there's the boss battles. While there's a few that take place, I will say that probably my most challenging was dealing with a real big tough guy. He might as well be the Goliath of the bunch because, oh man, he takes a lot of bullets. He takes a lot of abuse. And on top of all that, there's just other enemies that come in at the same time distracting me while he charges towards me. Yeah, that's the thing about challenge and multitasking. Games like these tend to really ramp up the difficulty towards the end when we get close enough to eventually figure out the truth and learn about the ending of the game itself. Because once I defeat this big guy, oh man, after all that crap that went down, the blood and gore, fighting against creatures and robots, we do eventually get to go face to face with Warden Cole once again. And Jacob is more than determined to make this not just any face-to-face encounter with the Warden, but also reveal the cold hard truth about all this. And explain that this whole series of things that has gone down was not just anything that he had dealt with, but it was in fact Warden Cole himself who was behind this whole massacre. This supposed outbreak that took place along Callisto in the first place. He practically wiped out Black Iron Prison, leaving very few to survive. And even worse, it went way beyond that level. These creatures were definitely no joke. Yeah. And I will say, they definitely can jump up on you and scare the crap out of you. And I will say I've had my own fair share of this sort of stuff, but many of which do tend to be around so that way I can engage him in close quarters, regardless of whether it's my weapons or otherwise. But even after Warden Cole is defeated, we still got one more big boss to deal with. And man, he's quite as much of a challenge as the last one, if not more than that. But then there comes the big ending we've pretty much been waiting for here. This ending was definitely not like what we would have expected. One would expect Jacob to get aboard the escape pods, but he doesn't really. In fact, Danny goes aboard, practically leaving him behind. Yeah. If that's not crazy enough, I don't know what is. One other thing I might as well mention here is the fact that this game does in fact come equipped with its own shop. Merchants, basically. This is a recurring thing that takes place because we do in fact get to have specialized currency as well as modules and valuables that we can sell and trade in. And all the while getting to upgrade our weapons in many different ways. Going from our melee weapons to our guns. Yeah. Same old stuff, as always. But still, that is one heck of an ending. An ending that practically opens the door to a sequel. But all that we got was actually a DLC called Final Transmission. Having played through that as well, I could say it does a pretty good effort at keeping the story alive and expanding a bit more on the overall lore of the Callisto Protocol entirely. But the fact is that this gives us the answer to the question, why did Lee not get aboard the escape pod alongside Danny? Well, the fact is he's stuck behind and eventually forged himself a giant axe. All the while so he could slash through those robots with ease. Oh man, they were pretty hard to deal with the first time around, so it's nice to finally have the opportunity to break those robots down into pieces with an axe nonetheless. All the while we're also trying to deal with some of the regular enemies as well. The thing is that we might be shooting them every which way, but most of the time it's close quarters combat with our melee weapon. We're simply slamming at them, we're simply tearing through them, ripping through them, and skull crunching through them. All the while we're trying to dodge their attacks as well, because any slip-ups could result in us getting injured. And remember, that module in the back of Jacob's neck also doubles as his health bar. And the fact is, you needed to keep it bright green with the LEDs all the way out. Because if they shrink down, they'll change color from orange to red and then empty to indicate that he's dead. But the true ending of the game itself does situate us on a small ship. Jacob Lee takes off on it, especially after defeating an incredibly fierce creature who was definitely not like the others that we dealt with thus far. And this does at least give us a true ending to the Callisto Protocol. While this game doesn't exactly own up to much others of its own kind, while it did fail amongst certain other things that took place, we at least are proud to have something like this exist. Because Dead Space would not really have been reignited the way that this game did help reignite it. And I'm more than excited about what the new Dead Space game could have, as well as what any other sequels they might have to offer, assuming if Dead Space itself happens to be a success. Because if not, then well, maybe it's for the best that they don't try to make sequels and possibly make it worse than it already is. But overall, the Callisto Protocol was a pretty nifty experience there. A bit of a change in pace from what we had seen in other third-person shooter, combat-based games with RPG elements all around the board. You got merchants, you got currency, you got valuable items, you got certain items of which that can be helpful, you got paths to explore, you got a map to figure out where you're supposed to go, and you got one heck of a storyboard between a prisoner and a warden. So I feel like that, with all that, this does at least chalk up to a good scoring of 8.5 out of 10.1. Not exactly a great deal that we have here, but it still is a rather good game enough for what it is. And the DLC that it offered at least gave us a true ending that otherwise probably would not have happened. So, with that in mind, if you guys come back tomorrow, I will once again have something more to showcase in this series. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.